Is this truly a sign from the Lord that a big change is imminent?
As you can see, I'm here on the Mount of Olives, and I'm looking for cracks.
What if I told you that right now, at this very moment, a mountain in Jerusalem is slowly tearing itself apart? And what if this same mountain was predicted thousands of years ago to split in two at the end of time? The cracks are real. The prophecy is ancient, and what's happening today might be the most significant sign of our generation. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about the times we're living in. This isn't speculation. This isn't fear-mongering. This is documented fact meeting ancient prophecy in the most unexpected way. I'm going to show you evidence that will make you question whether we're witnessing the beginning of the end.
Hey, we're on Mount of Olives near Jerusalem right now. This is the east side.
This is the Mount of Olives, and it's not just any mountain. It is a ridge of ancient limestone looking west toward the golden walls of Jerusalem. Behind it, the desert stretches towards the Dead Sea, and beneath it, the earth is quietly, almost imperceptibly moving. For over 3,000 years, this ridge has been the silent witness to some of the most pivotal moments in human history. Kings have wept here, prophets have proclaimed visions here, and according to multiple faith traditions, this mountain will be ground zero for the most significant event humanity will ever witness. But here's what most people don't know. The Mount of Olives is currently undergoing geological changes that match almost perfectly a prophecy written 2,500 years ago. Let me read you the exact words from the prophet Zechariah, chapter 14, verse 4. On that day his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives that lies before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west by a very wide valley, so that one half of the mount shall move northward and the other half southward. Now, here's the key question that should be burning in your mind. How could an ancient prophet describe with geological precision exactly how a mountain would split, in what direction, and what would happen to each half? Keep that question in your mind as I show you what's happening there today. In recent years, Israeli geologists made a discovery that sent shockwaves through both the scientific and religious communities. They confirmed that a major fault line, a massive crack in the Earth's crust, runs directly beneath the Mount of Olives, oriented from east to west. Let me say that again for emphasis. The fault line runs east to west, exactly as Zechariah described the mountain would split 2,500 years before modern geology even existed. But it gets even more precise. Geological surveys have revealed that this isn't just any fault line. It's part of the Great Rift Valley system, one of the most active seismic zones on the planet. The pressure building along this fault line is immense, and seismologists have warned that Jerusalem is overdue for a major earthquake. Now, here's where it gets impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Engineers working in Jerusalem have documented actual cracks appearing on the Mount of Olives. These aren't small fissures. We're talking about visible fractures in the bedrock running in the exact east-west direction that Zechariah prophesied. Let me show you why this matters. If I told you today that a mountain would split in a specific direction, I'd have a 50-50 chance of guessing right, north-south or east-west. But Zechariah didn't just guess the direction. He also described that one half would move north and the other south, creating a valley. And that's exactly what geologists say would happen if the fault line ruptured. The northern section would shift one way, the southern section another way, creating a massive valley between them. The mathematical probability of randomly guessing these specific details is astronomical, yet here we are watching it set up exactly as described. But before you think this is just about geology, let me show you something that will make your mind race. Here's something that will blow your mind. The Mount of Olives is the only place on earth that holds supreme prophetic significance for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam simultaneously. Think about that. 3 religions that disagree on almost everything all point to the same mountain as the location where the end of history will unfold. Let me break this down. For the Jewish people, the Mount of Olives is where the Messiah will first set foot when he comes. That's why over 150,000 graves cover its slopes, the most expensive cemetery real estate in the world. Why? Because Jewish tradition teaches that resurrection will begin here, and those buried closest will rise first. Imagine the faith it takes to choose your burial location based on a prophecy thousands of years old. These aren't just graves, they're declarations of belief carved into the landscape itself. For Muslims, Islamic eschatology teaches that the Day of Judgment will take place at the Mount of Olives. Humanity will be gathered here to face eternal destiny. The mountain represents the scales of divine justice. For Christians, this mountain is inseparable from Jesus himself. He taught here. He prayed in Gethsemane at its base, sweating drops of blood. He was betrayed in its shadow. And most importantly, he ascended to heaven from its summit. The book of Acts records that angels told the witnesses, "This same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven." The same way, from the same place, the Mount of Olives. Now here's the question that should shake you. What are the odds that 3 separate religious traditions, developing largely independently, all would identify the exact same geographic location as the center of end times prophecy? This isn't coincidence, this is convergence. And that convergence is happening at a mountain that is literally beginning to split apart. But there's another element to this puzzle that makes it even more extraordinary. Directly across from the Mount of Olives, on the eastern wall of Jerusalem, stands a gate that has been sealed shut for over 500 years. It's called the Golden Gate, or the Eastern Gate. Now, why would anyone seal a gate and keep it sealed for half a millennium? The answer lies in another prophecy. The prophet Ezekiel in chapter 44, verse 2 wrote, "This gate shall remain shut. It shall not be opened, and no one shall enter by it. For the Lord, the God of Israel, has entered by it. Therefore it shall remain shut." And it has. For centuries, no one has opened it. It faces directly towards the Mount of Olives, as if waiting. But here's what's happening now that changes everything. Recent engineering reports indicate that the Eastern Gate is showing signs of structural stress. The ancient stones are shifting, and some researchers claim these movements are synchronized with the geological changes on the Mount of Olives. Let me paint the picture. A mountain prophesied to split is developing cracks along a fault line. A gate prophesied to remain shut until a specific moment is beginning to show structural movement. And both are positioned exactly opposite each other, as if in conversation across the Kidron Valley. One prophecy says the mountain will split when Messiah's feet touch it. Another says the gate will remain shut until the Lord passes through it. And both are now moving. If you're still skeptical, I want you to ask yourself this question. What would it take for you to consider that maybe, just maybe, something significant is unfolding? Because I'm about to show you historical precedent that makes this even more compelling. The Bible records earthquakes at the most significant moments in spiritual history, and every single one carries a message. When Moses received the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai, the earth quaked. When Elijah stood before God in the cave, there was an earthquake. And most significantly, when Jesus died on the cross, Matthew chapter 27 records, the earth shook and the rocks were split. That earthquake was so powerful that it tore the temple veil from top to bottom and opened graves. Ancient historians outside the Bible, like Thales and Phlegon, documented unusual darkness and seismic activity during that exact time period. Then, when Jesus rose from the dead 3 days later, Matthew chapter 28 says, "There was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven." Do you see the pattern? Earth-shaking events accompany heaven-shaking moments. Now, the book of Revelation describes a future earthquake so massive that it will surpass anything in human history. Revelation 16:18 says, "There came flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, and a severe earthquake. No earthquake like it has ever occurred since mankind has been on earth, so tremendous was the quake." The Mount of Olives sits on a fault line capable of producing exactly such an earthquake. But here's what makes this historical pattern so profound. The ancient earthquake during King Uzziah's reign, mentioned in Amos chapter 1, was so devastating that it became a reference point for generations. Archaeologists have found evidence of massive destruction across Israel dating to that period. And Zechariah directly connects that ancient earthquake to the future splitting of the Mount of Olives in chapter 14, verse 5. "You will flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah." What Zechariah is saying is this: just as the earth shook in the past as a warning, it will shake again at the end as a fulfillment. The earth has a voice, and right now, beneath the Mount of Olives, that voice is beginning to speak. Let me take you deeper into something that most people overlook: the significance of the graves on the Mount of Olives. This isn't just a cemetery, it's a statement of faith that spans millennia. For thousands of years, Jewish families have chosen to bury their loved ones on this mountain, often at enormous expense. Some graves cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Why? Because of Ezekiel chapter 37, the vision of the Valley of Dry Bones. In this vision, God shows Ezekiel a valley full of bones and asks, "Can these bones live?" Then God commands Ezekiel to prophesy to the bones, and they come together, receive flesh, and breath enters them. They stand up as a vast army. Jewish tradition interprets this as a literal resurrection that will begin at the Mount of Olives when Messiah comes. So these 150,000 graves aren't symbols, they're not metaphors. They represent real people whose families believed so strongly in this prophecy that they chose their burial location accordingly. Now, imagine you're one of those families. You've just laid a loved one to rest on the Mount of Olives based on a promise written thousands of years ago. And then, in your lifetime, the mountain begins to crack. What would you think? Would you dismiss it as coincidence? Or would you wonder if the prophecy your family has believed for generations is finally approaching fulfillment? This is where prophecy stops being abstract theology and becomes deeply personal. Because if resurrection is real, if Ezekiel's vision was more than poetry, then the movement of this mountain isn't just geology, it's the earth preparing for the greatest awakening in human history. Now, I want to address the skeptics directly, because I respect the need for evidence. Let's look at what science tells us. The Mount of Olives sits on an active fault line. Tectonic plates are grinding beneath it. Stress is building. Seismologists predict that a major earthquake is not a question of if, but when. The cracks appearing on the mountain are geological precursors to a significant seismic event. That's the scientific explanation, and it's completely valid. But here's what makes this unique. Science describes the mechanism, how the mountain could split. Prophecy describes the meaning, why it will split, and when. And here's the extraordinary part. They don't contradict each other. They complement each other. Think about it this way. If I tell you I'm going to flip a light switch, science explains the electrical current that will illuminate the bulb. But science doesn't explain why I chose that specific moment to flip the switch. That's purpose, not mechanism. What if the geological forces beneath the Mount of Olives are the mechanism through which ancient prophecy will be fulfilled? The prophet Zechariah didn't have access to modern geology. He didn't know about tectonic plates or fault lines, yet he described with precision exactly how a mountain would split and in what direction. That's not lucky guessing. That's either divine revelation or the most astonishing coincidence in geological history. And here's what tips the scales for me. The prophecy doesn't just describe a random mountain splitting. It specifically identifies the Mount of Olives, connects it to a divine appearance, and links it to the most significant moment in human history. Science gives us the how, prophecy gives us the why and when, and right now, both are pointing to the same mountain. But the Mount of Olives isn't happening in isolation. It's part of a larger pattern of signs that Jesus himself said we should watch for. In Matthew chapter 24, sitting on the Mount of Olives, Jesus described the signs of the end of the age. He mentioned wars and rumors of wars, earthquakes in various places, famines and pestilences, the gospel being preached to all nations, and deception on a massive scale. Now, I'm not going to do what so many prophecy teachers do and claim every headline is a sign. That's irresponsible, and it numbs people to genuine patterns. But here's what we can't ignore. For the first time in human history, the gospel can be preached to all nations through technology. We've witnessed global pestilence in our lifetime. Seismic activity is measurably increasing. Wars and geopolitical tensions are escalating, and deception through deep fakes, AI, and manipulated information has reached levels that would have been impossible a generation ago. These aren't individual signs, they're a constellation of conditions that create a unique moment in history. And at the center of it all, the Mount of Olives, the mountain Jesus stood on when he gave these prophecies, is beginning to fracture. It's as if the mountain itself is confirming his words. But here's what I want you to understand. The point of prophecy isn't to create fear, it's to create preparedness. Jesus said these things not to terrify us, but to wake us up, to make us ask the deep questions, to evaluate what truly matters. So let me ask you directly, if the Mount of Olives split open tomorrow exactly as Zechariah described, would you be ready? I'm not asking if you have your theology perfectly sorted. I'm not asking if you understand every detail of eschatology. I'm asking something much simpler. If the prophecies are true, if we really are approaching the culmination of human history, are you living in a way that reflects that reality? Because here's what I've noticed. Most people live as if they have unlimited time. We postpone the important for the urgent. We invest in the temporary while neglecting the eternal. We build our lives on foundations that can't withstand shaking. But the writer of Hebrews gives us this warning in chapter 12. See that you do not refuse him who is speaking. For if they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, much less will we escape if we reject him who warns from heaven. At that time his voice shook the earth, but now he has promised, yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. The passage continues. This phrase, yet once more, indicates the removal of things that are shaken, that is, things that have been made, in order that the things that cannot be shaken may remain. In other words, the shaking is intentional. It's designed to reveal what's real and what's not, what's eternal and what's temporary. The cracks in the Mount of Olives aren't just geological phenomena. They're a mirror being held up to our lives, asking us, what are you building on? What foundation are you trusting? Throughout history, humanity has built kingdoms, empires, monuments, and civilizations, all claiming permanence, and every single one has fallen. The Egyptians built pyramids designed to last forever. They're tourist attractions now. The Romans built an empire they believed would never end. It's a chapter in history books. Medieval cathedrals were constructed to stand for eternity. Many are ruins today. Even the strongest mountains eventually erode. But there's one kingdom that cannot be shaken, one foundation that will never fail.
Daniel chapter 2 describes a vision where a stone cut out by no human hand destroys all earthly kingdoms and becomes a mountain that fills the whole earth. The interpretation, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. This is what the Mount of Olives prophecy is really about. It's not primarily about destruction, it's about establishment. The shaking of earthly things so that the unshakable kingdom can be revealed. And here's the invitation that prophecy extends to every single person. You can be part of that unshakable kingdom. Not through your own efforts, not through religious performance, but through trusting in the one who conquered death itself, the same one who ascended from the Mount of Olives with a promise to return. The Apostle Paul wrote in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, "Now concerning the times and the seasons, brothers, you have no need to have anything written to you, for you yourselves are fully aware that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. But you are not in darkness, brothers, for that day to surprise you like a thief." In other words, those who are paying attention won't be caught off guard. The Mount of Olives is cracking, the signs are aligning, the prophecies are pressing forward. The question isn't whether these things will happen, the question is, will you be ready when they do? So, is this the beginning of the end? I can't tell you with certainty that the final fulfillment of the Mount of Olives prophecy will happen in our lifetime. No one knows the day or the hour. But I can tell you this. For the first time in history, all the conditions are in place. The geological fault line exists exactly where prophecy said it would. The mountain is showing stress in the exact direction described 2,500 years ago. The convergence of prophetic expectations across multiple faiths is unprecedented, and the surrounding signs Jesus described are visible to anyone paying attention. Whether this is the generation that sees the complete fulfillment or simply another step in that direction, one thing is absolutely certain. The prophecies of the Mount of Olives are not fairy tales. They're not ancient myths. They're specific, testable predictions that are aligning with observable reality in our time. And that should change how we live. It should change what we value, what we pursue, how we treat others, what we build our lives upon. Because when the mountain finally splits, whether that's tomorrow or 100 years from now, the only thing that will matter is whether you built your life on the foundation that cannot be shaken. The earth is groaning, the mountain is cracking, the ancient prophecies are echoing louder than ever. The question isn't whether the end is beginning. The question is, are you ready for what's coming next? If this video impacted you, if it made you think, question, or reconsider, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to see this. These aren't just interesting facts. This is information that could change how people understand the times we're living in. Subscribe and turn on notifications because I'm continuing to research and uncover connections between ancient prophecy and current events that you won't find anywhere else. Drop a comment below and let me know, do you think we're witnessing the beginning of the end? What's your take on the Mount of Olives prophecy? I read every comment and I want to hear your perspective. And finally, if you want to go deeper into biblical prophecy and how it relates to current events, check out the video I'm linking in the description. It connects directly to what we've discussed today and takes you even further into understanding the times we're living in. The Mount of Olives is speaking. The question is, are we listening? I'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay watchful, stay grounded, and remember, build your life on what cannot be shaken.